When we first started, and this is usually what you do, you sell to the companies that you sell best to. You know what I mean? And usually what that means is fast sales cycle, decent ASP, it feels right, it glides through, conversion rates are high, blah, blah, blah. And so, but that often isn't, oftentimes that's not a one-to-one with your best customers, right? And so then you start to get data, and this is exactly what we went through. We first started selling to now, of course, they were B2B companies, so we weren't trying to sell to B2C, we weren't way off, but it was just
The end goal is not just acquiring new logos. It's acquiring new logos and keeping them and getting them to renew and hopefully renew at larger amounts. So what we were looking at was what were the characteristics of the companies that renewed consistently and then renewed at even larger amounts. And what we tried to do was break it out into 3 profiles, like a kind of a best fit profile, a good fit profile, meh profile.
Yep.
It's obviously not the real names. And then thanks but no thanks profile.
Yep. Yeah. Thanks for it. See, you can see Mark and I are a good team. I lose my train of thought. He just picks it right up. So, no, that's exactly right. So we were selling to who we sold best to. And then, we started seeing some churn. And we're like, oh, man, this is churn. This is not good. And so we dug into the churn, really. And we started to realize, what are the accounts that are churning? And that's really where we started to refine that ICP into those 4 buckets that you talked about. And it made sense, too. It always helps if when you redo the ICP, it actually just makes sense. Because if you redo the ICP and it was all of a sudden, dramatically different, you'd have to question it a little bit. But this one was you look at it and you're like, well, yeah. You know what I mean? You're like, well, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And so that's always nice when you can get that gut check of okay, it's reasonable, the street smarts test. And so then we just started refocusing our budgets, our demand campaigns. We didn't do it all at once. You know what I mean? We're kind of slowly making the move because we just want to make sure that we're not shooting ourselves in the foot, but we're going up market by making that change. You know what I mean? We're basically, that ICP change for us was eliminating the smallest companies is what it really ended up becoming. And then also going up in terms of our required monthly ad spend, because we saw the requirement we started with was too low, where customers were actually not being able to test enough to make the changes that the platform's good at making. And so we were like, oh, that's not good. So we'll see how it goes. We'll maybe touch on it on a future episode because we literally just started.
And the last thing I'll add before we get to questions is when we're looking at those tiers now, then we can start to see how should we prioritize our time, our activities and programs that we're running, and then more importantly, spend against those different tiers. It's not to say that we should only spend on that best fit tier. We're going to be spending a decent chunk of our budget there, but we still want to make sure that the good fit accounts and the maybe even meh accounts are still on the receiving end of our campaigns.
Yeah, and what was nice about the way we segmented it is we did it in a way where we could still market to the meh, but what we did is we just added additional qualification to it, which is, so that's it kind of balances it out. So I love that approach because now we have the campaign separated by tiers, and we're like, oh, the C tier, let's actually, they got to be spending up here really, because we know the company size is pretty small and stuff. So they got to be kind of a unicorn really to make it through. And so that's another thing you could do, start segmenting by those tiers, and then you can actually ask different qualifying questions.